Emily, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today and really looking forward to our conversation. The topic that I don't think gets enough attention, but before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what it is that you do, and what's brought you here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I'm excited for our conversation today. So, I am a holistic trauma recovery coach, and I am really passionate about helping trauma surviving moms to navigate their childhood trauma triggers as they walk through healing their trauma while in the midst of parenting. It's a whole lot to handle all at the same time. And so I'm passionate about giving them the tools that they're missing so that they can be the mama they want to be.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And a lot of the times, what I find with people is they will often want to do the work they're doing because they've experienced it themselves. So I'm curious if that's something that was going on for you and you had some experiences that allowed you to find not only meaning through your own experience, but then wanting to support and help others.
Yeah. So where I'm at now, totally, it comes from my own journey. When my daughter was born in 2018, she looked like baby me. And while that's insanely adorable, it's also insanely triggering. And so that led to conversations with God about, if you help me get through this, I will help other mamas to walk through the fire, because I know I'm not special enough to be the only one dealing with this garbage. And as as common as it is, and it is very common, there isn't a lot of conversation around it, and there
Mhm.
isn't a lot of support for women or men either who are facing dealing with trauma in the midst of parenting. There's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to explore a little bit further, just your experience, if we may, because that may bring some context for the listeners as well. And then we can jump into some of the pervasive aspects of the trauma that often new parents experience. In your case, what was so triggering? Like, I know you said seeing your own child and some of the similarities can be very adorable, but why was it triggering at the same time for you?
So for me, I had a hard time discerning where boundaries were. So where I started and my mom stopped, and where I stopped and my daughter started. And for me, what was the most the biggest hurdle was understanding that I am not my mom. She made the choices that she made with the tools that she had and the circumstances she was in. And I could make my own path. And my daughter was not destined to feel the same hurt and abandonment and abuse and all of that stuff that I had felt. So, really acknowledging and understanding those boundaries of other people was huge for me. And because when I was looking down at my daughter,
Mhm.
every alarm bell system inside of me was telling me to run, because that type of relationship isn't safe.
Mhm.
And it was a perceived danger for my body, that it wasn't an actual danger. My daughter wasn't going to hurt me, and I wasn't willingly going to hurt her,
Right.
but my nervous system can't tell the difference between perceived and real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, cognitively, I knew that if I listened to those alarm bells, I was going to end up repeating the cycle of maternal abandonment. And I didn't want to hurt my daughter in that way. I also didn't want to hurt my husband in that way. And he would have been collateral damage, because it wasn't about him. It wasn't about my daughter. It would have been all about my survival instincts.
Yeah.
So I knew that I had a choice. I could listen to those alarm bells and hit the road, or I could stay and figure it out. And I chose the latter, the staying and figuring it out, because I deserved it. My daughter deserved it. My husband deserved it. And conquering those fears and learning to calm my nervous system was needed.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And what I'm hearing there is a lot of the times, and this is very common when we've experienced our own version of trauma, we tend to project it onto others. And from your story, what I'm understanding is one of your concerns was that you may hurt your daughter the same way that you were hurt.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times we don't know what to do with that intergenerational trauma unless we put an end to it, right? And
Yeah,
and sometimes it starts with us, and there's many layers to it as well. You're not going to be able to resolve everything because you can only resolve what's in your conscious awareness, and as much
exactly.
as you can go and find that, right? So that's what I'm understanding. And at what point for you did that shift happen? And I know you turned towards God and there was that aspect of prayer there, but when did you actually start seeing it manifest in terms of your relationship with your daughter?
I I had to do a lot of inner work. It took a lot of journaling, of figuring out why I hated being a mother so much. I love my daughter and I love my son, but I hated being a mother. It wasn't until, well, just a couple of years ago. My daughter is going to be 6 this year. So just a couple of years ago, and I was writing in my journal, and the words just flowed out of me that a maternal relationship for me is has not been safe.
Mhm.
My biological mom abandoned me. Any stepmother figure that I've had in my life didn't want me. And my grandmother, as much as she tried, in her boomer way, she loved me as much as she could. But there was a lot of trauma in her life as well.
Right.
So it it's a deep rooted wound, because, like, for me, a mother has is someone who loves you conditionally. A mother is someone who runs, who hurts, and those are none of the things that I want to be for my kids.
Right.
I want them to know that no matter what, mama loves them. No matter what, they are seen, heard, and loved.
Yeah.
And I believe that is my responsibility as their mom. So it took a lot of work,
Yeah.
and it wasn't sunshine and rainbows every single day.
Yeah. no, I can appreciate that. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. And as much as you said, taking a lot of work, I'm assuming it's ongoing, right?
Oh,
The
yeah.
journey never ends. And yeah, and I found that too myself as being a father. Like at the end of the day, best thing I can do for my son as a father is continue to work on myself, irrespective of what the circumstances are, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not he approves of it, whether or not I get the validation from not only him, but people around me, the best thing I can do is to work on myself. That reflects in all my relationships. I definitely appreciate everything you've shared. Now, we've touched on one layer of the trauma that we can inherit, especially when we become parents. And a lot of the times, and for me too, personally, I tend to give my son more of the things that I wish I had received. And that can also push things too far to the extreme.
Yeah.
But what are some other forms of trauma that can come up for parents, especially new parents, in terms of the work you do and the people you work with? What are some of the other traumas that come up to the surface for people?
So there's the trigger aspect. And I want to just point out for your listeners that when you're in a situation with your child and you find yourself triggered, you're not actually triggered by whatever your kid is doing.
Mhm.
You're triggered by a memory, a feeling that the action of your child is pulling up for you. So, an example of that, my son is a screamer. Bless his little heart, he loves to scream when he gets frustrated
Mhm.
or any reason. But
Right.
when he's frustrated, he screams. And early on in my healing journey, my nervous system could not handle that. And so one day he was throwing fit after fit after fit. And it was like an hour and a half of constant screaming. And my nervous system could not handle it any longer. And I had so much pent up energy in my body. I had to release it in some way or I was going to explode.
Mm.
So in a moment that I'm not proud of, I kicked the wall. I thought I didn't kick it hard, but apparently I did because there was a hole in the wall. And immediately I was like, oh crap, that was the wrong thing to do, but I feel better. And that was the beginning of really, okay, so when I feel that way, I need to get the energy out in a non-destructive way because my son is watching, my daughter is watching, and I don't want them kicking holes in the wall because that's
Mm.
expensive to fix.
Right.
So it's developed a practice of talking about our triggers and how we can cope with them in a healthier way.
Mm.
Other things that can come up. So there's different different relationships that can be challenging, grandparent relationships, parent relationships, family members who feel like they can tell you how to parent because they've been a parent long before you, and
Yeah.
so they know better, and nothing, and understanding how to navigate that relationship and being scared to speak up for yourself because you are a new parent and you don't know what you're doing. The types of relationships where there's somebody who has a habit of gaslighting or manipulating, those narcissistic relationships, can be really hard to navigate as a new parent.
Yeah.
And then there's societal traumas that we have because of the narrative within our society that because you decided to have a child, you can't complain about it. You can't
Mm,
talk about the hard things. And because you're the mother of the child, you are more responsible for certain aspects than the father is. And there's that narrative in our society that we have to work through. And if you're not careful, it can bring up some um so there's that's a deep question
yeah.
because there's so many things that as a new parent you have to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we haven't touched on, but is very prevalent in our Western society is the us being in a individualistic society. Whereas when you look at other parts of the world where the culture is more collectivistic, you could see truly it takes a tribe, right? And you
Oh,
see a lot of family support, relatives, neighbors, members of the community all pulling in. Often they're all playing a part in the support of not only the mother, but the newborn, right? And that can take a huge load off. Whereas where we are, yeah, you get some support from the hospital and the nurses for a few days, but then you're off on your own. And especially if you're a parent for the first time, there's so many things that you're figuring out, so many things happening. You don't know why the baby's crying, what it might need, and all that stuff that you're trying to figure out for the first time. So that can also play a huge factor. Whereas when you have that support system where you have other people supporting and coming in and maybe even letting you get that extra sleep, that can make a huge difference on the individual's mental health and their
yeah.
ability to function as a new parent.
Yeah. 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 In my situation, I was in labor for 23 and a half hours, had emergency surgery immediately after having my daughter. And I think the for the entirety of our hospital stay, I got maybe 5 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
So we're bringing home our brand new baby girl, already dog tired, and we had no support. There was some support for baby, and there were supports for breastfeeding. But when it came to postpartum, mental health, those things, it was it was basically non-existent. And if you want to call a 5-minute doctor's appointment 6 weeks postpartum support, that that just doesn't cut it, especially when you look at the model that is in other countries. I know Germany and Sweden, I believe, both have amazing support systems for postpartum women and families.
Yeah,
So I think that's something that North America, the US, and Canada can do better.
right. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you've touched on the whole piece around postpartum depression. And one of the things is it's great that we're aware of it, right? We talk about it, but I don't see or feel like there's anything done beyond that. I'm wondering if you've seen anything differently, but we tend to talk about it, and women will say, "Yeah, I've had postpartum," or people in general will say, "Yeah, postpartum depression is the real thing." But there's nothing really there. And I haven't really seen a whole lot of resources either that can provide support. And I think I mentioned to you when we first chatted that I've had a couple of other individuals from the UK come on and they talked about even the postpartum depression for men
Yeah.
and fathers, right? And I just think it's an issue in general
Mhm.
that perhaps needs more attention, but I don't think we're talking about enough in the sense that we're creating action.
Yeah. So I have not seen a whole lot in terms of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, baby blues, anything for support. One thing that I have noticed in my work is that we are a traumatized nation, nations. We are traumatized. And so when you come up to a big life change, like becoming a parent, it brings so much to the forefront
Mm,
that is demanding to be dealt with. And the mental health supports that we have in place are just skimming the surface.
mm,
And there's not enough currently in the way of trauma informed mental health support. If you are speaking with someone who has faced horrendous traumas in their life and you have no perspective of the pain that they have felt, you are capable of causing more harm than good.
yeah,
You have no perspective to understand where they're coming from. So you can have the best intentions possible and still cause harm.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And then one of the other things you touched on your own personal experience that you had an emergency kind of surgery to have your baby, and that can add another layer of complexity to all of it, right? Opposed to natural birth, that is another layer that you have to deal with, not only in terms of the rest you require, but the recovery as well. And
Yeah.
then to have to deal with a newborn on top of it, not easy.
No, birth trauma, having something go awry during labor and delivery causes another layer to postpartum because you've got moms who are feeling guilty because their birth didn't go the way they had hoped it would. You have moms who are feeling traumatized because their medical team didn't communicate with them and they didn't know what was going on. That's what happened um, with the birth of my daughter. Our medical team didn't communicate with us. We didn't know what was happening. I had my daughter on my chest. They said, "We have to go to surgery, sign this paper." And I was whisked away.
Mm,
I, I didn't get my golden hour. I got waking up from general anesthetic, all groggy. Oh, look, there's my dog. And it didn't go the way that I had prepared and I had envisioned for it to go. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you end up with an emergency C-section and it's for the health of mom and baby. But it's still a trauma that you have to work through and you have to heal from, on top of raising a newborn
Yeah.
and navigating the, I don't like the term new normal, but
Mhm.
that's what it is. And if you've got a trauma freight train coming at you, it's a lot. And there there definitely needs to be more support.
Uh, Yeah, and another thing you touched on there in terms of not only the guilt, but I think there's an aspect of shame that
Mhm,
pervasive there and can exist in the background, not only with the experience of childbirth, but even after the fact, if for whatever reason you can't breastfeed or you're dealing with your own mental health or you're struggling, or you mentioned in your own case, dealing with your own trauma and you don't feel like you're fully showing up as a parent because you've got all these other things that you're fighting with, that can bring about shame too, because
yeah.
again, in society, we have this expectation that not only we put on ourselves, it's just there that,
Mhm,
okay, now I'm a parent and now I have to take care of this baby and all my other needs and wants and the
mhm,
things I should be getting should all go to the wayside and
mhm.
this primary focus. And I think that causes a lot of problems too. And you see that quite a bit, and I don't know if there's any correlation or if any studies, but when empty nesters then finally start dealing with their own stuff, because they've probably put it on hold for so many
Yeah.
years, and then a lot of these things start coming to the surface, whereas you tuck them away.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think there's that shame too, right? And then I think it also prevents us from asking for help, for
Yeah.
being open and vulnerable and saying, "You know what? I am really struggling with this and I don't know what to do, or I need help," or whatever support you might need. It's just hard to be vocal about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that perceived, unspoken expectation that, okay, now I'm a mom. Now all of my needs don't matter. And it's all on the everything. The only thing that matters is the baby. And that's a load of crap. It's a load of crap. Because if you don't take care of yourself, how are you supposed to take care of another person
Mhm.
who is completely dependent upon you?
Right.
They need you to eat. They need you to go to bed. They need you to clean their diaper. Like,
Yeah.
they need you. And care of yourself. And I know it's difficult because you are dog tired and you don't feel like you have any time in the day, but it's critically important.
Mm.
Critically important.
Yeah. I know we've talked quite a bit about all the problems. I would like to shift towards, okay, what are some things people can do? And perhaps a good segue into that would be understanding what kind of support and resources you're providing in terms of the work you're doing. And I know you touched on earlier, that was one of the things you had prayed for was if you can get through this experience, then you'd want to help others through theirs. How has that been going before we jump into some of the things you're doing? How is the role of now being on the other side and supporting other parents? Or I'm assuming are you only working with women?
Yeah, I focus on moms because I have that perspective. Men are wired differently. How a woman deals with a a trauma is very different. Like in the case of my husband and I'm a talker or a journaler, and he will go for a walk in the woods and everything's cool.
Mhm.
I focus on helping mamas. And I I absolutely love seeing the mamas that I work with have those light bulb overcomer moments. Holy cow, Emily, I just did insert goal. I just made a meal plan and did most of the prep for it. I just, my kid triggered me and I didn't flip my lid.
Right.
So I love that part of it. Yeah.
So what are you offering then to these women that you're working with in terms of supporting them with the process of being a new parent? So we've talked about how overwhelming it can be, the lack of support, not only from the system, but whereas in other cultures, there's the support from the family or community in general. How are you bridging that gap in terms of the work you're doing?
So one of my core beliefs is that healing should not be a privilege.
Mm.
Healing, your bank account should not get to determine if you get to heal or not.
Right.
One thing that I have done is I've created a community on Facebook, and inside there, I offer the group version of my coaching program for free.
Mm.
And like, you don't get the one-to-one support, but you get a community
Mhm.
of other moms and myself who have the perspective, who've been there, who can help you figure out the stuff, navigate through the early days of motherhood, of healing. And it's a beautiful little hole on the internet
Yeah.
uh, that is focused on lifting each other up and taking care of each other. That is, and then I'm also developing a resource shop because there aren't a lot of resources.
Right.
And so my hope is that this will be a place where a mama can come when she's ready for a stepping stone and she can choose her stepping stone. She can take it, work on it, and then come back and get another stepping stone and just build on that. I've also developed a community through my podcast, and that the Mamahood After Trauma podcast is a community of other healers and mamas who are healing, who have maybe used different methodologies than I have. And we have the real, authentic conversations that everyone's thinking about, but no one is talking about. And those are just three of the ways that I am bridging that gap.
Right. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for building on that. And what I'm really hearing is you're replicating that whole aspect of community
Mhm.
that is missing at times where, especially if you're a new parent or new mom in this context, you don't have that community. So you're able to connect with other people who are going through a similar experience. And that's where mental health really kicks in, is where we tend to do it on our own. And then
Mhm.
we tell ourselves that I'm the only one struggling with this. And as I touched on the shame piece, because I'm struggling with this, I don't want to talk about it because I feel like I shouldn't be. and that shouldn't piece. So once you're able to then connect with other people who are perhaps in the same shoes as you or experiencing something similar, then they can put that out there and learn from each other and not
Yeah.
feel like they're in isolation or alone trying to figure things out. And then to your point, you've got the resources as well where people can go find information that can be beneficial. I do appreciate that. I think that's amazing work that you're doing. Is there anything else you feel like we haven't touched on in this space, as complex as it is, that you feel would be of value for the listeners or that you would like to share?
No, I think what we've covered so far is a great starting place.
Mm.
And I don't want to overwhelm
Yeah,
listeners because then you get in overload paralysis and you do nothing. And
right.
that's not helpful either. So,
Yeah, fair enough. And one of the other things I would say is what you're encouraging people is at least to do is focus on their healing and make that a
yeah.
priority. And we touched on that in the beginning of the episode that in order for us to be better parents, we need to focus on, turn that attention towards ourselves. That whole aspect of self love needs to come first. It, again, this whole analogy of putting on your oxygen mask first, it's overused now. But I remember hearing it for the first time flying with my son. Just, I had heard it before, but not as a parent. And that whole notion of it didn't sit well with me that, "What do you mean I'm not gonna put on his mask first?" That's my innate response, but it makes sense, right? And it's the
Hmm.
same idea here that in order to be better parents and being able to show up for our children, we need to put that focus on ourselves first, do our healing, make it a priority. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I also appreciate your vulnerability to share your own meltdown because that can create a lot of shame. But I'm sure every parent has their own version of that experience where they did something and they were just like, oh man, like my kids are watching and yeah, I'm doing the opposite of what I should be doing. So it takes the courage to even be open about that. So again, I commend you for that and I appreciate your vulnerability.
Yeah. There, our kids serve to be a mirror of the things that we need to work on. And that can be a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but it can be a huge blessing as well. Yes. There are so many moments where my kids have taught me so much, and it's amazing how it works.
Yes. They're little sponges, right? And they're
Oh,
absorbing
yeah.
everything. And I that's what I like to remind everyone, including myself, is they don't act based on what we tell them. They act based on what they observe from us.
Oh, yeah.
And that way to role model is through our actions rather than our words. So I definitely agree with you there. Emily, thank you so much for coming on here. Is there anything else you would like to add in terms of how people can find you if they wanted to get a hold of you or some of the stuff you have online in terms of resources or even the Facebook group that you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so if you want to find me online, you can find me through my podcast, the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. It's available on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you just search my name, it will come up. And if you're looking for the resource shop, you can go to my website, home.mendedmamalife.ca. That's home.mendedmamalife.ca. And there's a little tab at the top that says resources. You can click there and it will be all right there.
Perfect. I'll put all that in the show notes, but thank you again for coming on here and sharing your experience and insight with the listeners today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.